We're live. Hello, 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 world. Hello, YouTube. Um, and make sure that I have not done that again, which I did, but we're okay. We're all good. So as always, my YouTube start the same way. All of you members and people on the live will be well aware of how haphazard and all over the place the first initial 5 minutes of my lives are. I apologize for that. You would think that maybe having a guest on like Kevin here from Brehon Academy might encourage me to be a bit more organized. If anything, it's a testament to how relaxed and how close a friendship we have had built, that I feel like I can be totally myself with him, and you can see me for all the craziness that exists with
Warts and
my
all, right?
exactly. So you got to see me. You got to see me for what I am. So um, yes. Let me just get this going here. So oh, we are right. Do you know what? I was adjusting something and I didn't even realize that it's actually my screen that's the problem, not Kevin's. So, right. Um, okay, without further ado, let me just get this one up and going too. And because TikTok normally takes a couple of seconds just to come in, so YouTube, you're so used to this by now. But TikTok normally gets the fresher greetings, shall we say, because I've normally warmed up a couple of seconds beforehand. um, so, and then I'm just going to move this chat out of your face. Right, so without further ado, we're all live, we're all singing, we're all dancing. Thank you for hanging around there, Kevin, while I sorted out all the business and got through all my technical problems. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you. If you'd, it's a great honor to have you on here, Kevin, and thank you for having me on your channel the other week. And now it's an honor to return the favor and have you on to discuss, um, you know, Brehon Law and the families that are associated with it, and all the fine tuning. So, without further ado, if you'd like to introduce yourself, and hopefully, we can get this ball rolling.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that, Mihal. Yeah, so for those who don't know me, my name is Kevin Flanagan, and I am the founder of the Brehon Academy. I have a degree in law, and I have a master's in politics, philosophy, and economics. So that's kind of like the big four of understanding how society works. And I founded the Brehon Academy in 2013. That was just when I finished my law degree. And I founded the Brehon Academy because I realized that there was some gaps in the knowledge of Irish people and this very important part of their heritage. And so the Brehon Academy kind of acts as a bridge, I suppose, between the academic world and the the modern popular world. Let's just say that, and that's why I make a lot of videos, and I have a YouTube channel which you were so kind as to be the guest on recently. I also have a couple of online courses, and I have a YouTube, oh no, a website as well. We're on TikTok. We're not on TikTok. We're on X. I said that because you were talking about TikTok previously. We're on X, we're on Instagram as well, and yeah, we're on YouTube. So if anybody wants to, if you're not subscribed to my channel, please go over there and subscribe. It's Brehon Academy.
Brilliant, brilliant stuff. Lovely introduction. Yeah, like I say, he's got blogs. He's got on his website as well. There's PDFs that you can sort of download if you want to read some of the more content in your own leisure, and then use the channel as well to attend his lives and his videos and his premieres. He I've had some great conversations with him. So, and he's so close to 30,000 subscribers. So, if all of us can, get on there and just tip him over the edge, that would be fantastic. Yeah, so but for those of you who are coming in through TikTok and aren't fully aware what we're doing tonight, because I know TikTok's a bit crazy for letting just massive amounts of people come in. We will be covering Brehon Law and the families that were involved in it. And if you like what you hear, like say, go across to Brehon Academy on YouTube and give him a follow. So I think we'll just dive right in. So Dear Shane, how's the box? Sean, how you doing? Love both of your contents, very great stuff. It's helped me a lot in my research, so thanks lads, keep it going. Thank you, Caveman Graffiti. We won't really go through too many questions through this. We'll just maybe keep them to the end once we start this, and like I say, hopefully some of your names pop up if you're interested in that. I think we can start now, because there's 100 on TikTok and there's about 11 on YouTube, so I think that's good enough to start going there. The first question I would kind of like to ask is like social status. So what was like the official status or rank of a Brehon within Gaelic order? Were they considered nobles, professionals, or somewhere in between?
Yeah. I mean, it's a great question, and we have to put it into perspective that we're talking about a very long time frame here. And so when you go back far enough, the druid was the person who had the office or the function of being the poet, the people who keep history, and the lawgiver, the judges. So Brehons, they kind of held a unique position in Gaelic Ireland. They're best described as elite professionals with a status akin but distinct from nobility. They were not nobles in the sense of territorial lords, but were highly regarded and respected members of the learned classes. And those learned classes were called the Aes Dana. So the Brehons, they kind of, the learned classes were considered the second highest grade in society, next to the lords, next to the chieftains. And that is reflected in the laws of Tyrnmus. And Tyrnmus gave a certain, he decreed that the different grades should wear a certain amount of colours to reflect their standing. So where the royal family were to wear 5 colours, the learned classes were to wear 4 colours. And then the warriors, I think, were to wear 3 colours. The workers were 2 colours, and then the servants were 1 colour. So why am I saying that? Because in most societies outside of Ireland, you would imagine that the warriors were the second in prestige, second on the hierarchy. But in Ireland, it was actually the learned classes. So that included the Brehons in earlier times, and when I say earlier times, I mean pre-Christian times, the Druids, the Fili, and the high grade artisans. So that's like people who are making the harps or playing the harps. So their role as legal experts, interpreting and administering Brehon law. And I should say, for those who are just listening or tuning in and don't know anything about Brehon law, it was the name of it's the name that we give to early Irish law, but the early Irish didn't really call it that. That's more of an English word, and the reason why we call it Brehon law today is because of the English word for the Irish word for a judge, which is brehov, and so that has been anglicised to Brehon. But back in the day, it was called the Fennicus, and that was one of the law languages. There were several law languages, but one of them, and you could say this was the law on the commoners, was called the Fennicus, and that applied to a class of people called the Feni, which means the free land tillers. So kind of like the free farmers, the free men on the land. And but still, the Brehons were granted special privileges, such as land grants, exemptions from military service, and exemptions from um, paying tributes to their
Yes.
lords.
Yeah, so I
Um,
sort of read that it was like if they were exempt from certain tributes, and they also could sort of have like free travel, like between different tour,
yeah,
still offer protection, which um,
yeah, that's a really good point. So, just to explain to people who might not know, there was early Ireland, and at different times in history, the composition of the Tuatha, which is what we call these kingdoms, they were essentially organizations of clans and dynasties.
mhm.
um, they were okay. So if you were from one of those clans, your status was based on your reputation, and you only had a reputation among people who knew you. So if you went from your Tua to another Tua, your status, you would lose your status. So you wouldn't even have standing in the eyes of the law. So that's up until you were mugged, or you were attacked or something like that, and then you would have standing. You would have standing based on the fact that you were a foreigner, you were a visitor,
Yeah.
and under the laws of hospitality, you would be able to get justice. But to come back to what you said a moment ago, the Brehons and the Fili, which are the poets, and the Druids in earlier times, they were the only people who could move between these tuatha and retain their status. And that was reflected in their honor price. So whereas you would lose your honor price if you went to a different clan, to a different tua, the Brehons would retain, the Brehons and the learned classes would retain that. And their status was derived from the expertise, the hereditary roles that they took, rather than martial power, and that placed them in a prestigious professional tier within Gaelic social hierarchy.
Brilliant stuff. I'm just going back to if you're asking questions, just leave them till the end. I know a lot of you are sort of wanting to. I mean, keep them sort of coming. I'll try and remember some of them. And yes, it's my birthday. Thank you very much, everyone.
Oh yeah, happy birthday.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you, Dogs. Thank you all for wishing me happy birthday. And the sound's okay, so that's good. I'm getting good feedback about the sound, so brilliant. So yeah. Then sort of next point, I suppose, then with land protections, freedom of freedom of movement visa, and this ability to move around, would obviously uh, um, would need to be quite prevalent for things like training and education, which kind of leads me on to the sort of my next point is, how did Brehon families sort of maintain and transmit their legal learnings across generations, and were there known schools or centres where this sort of training occurred?
Yeah. So we kind of have to break it down according to before the Anglo-Normans invaded, and after the Anglo-Normans invaded. Because before the Anglo-Normans invaded, there was more in the nature of schools. So I'm looking at the book here. I have this early Irish law, and I have it open on law schools. And in the first part of this chapter, it says this: there was the purpose of the law text was clearly to instruct judges in the theory and practice of Irish law. Now, there was the Shenkis Mar School, there was the Med School, and then there was other schools as well. And um, the Shenkis Mór is the main text that we have of Brehon law, and it's translated as great tradition. Okay, so the Nemed school is the law of the nobles. So where the Shankis Mór would be dealing with the Fennicis, the Fenni, the Nemed will be dealing with more of the noble classes. Now, there are other schools as well, such as the Crick Gavloch, and that exhibits quite a different approach to legal composition than is found in other surviving texts. It is noteworthy that a later commentator at Corpus Juris Hibernicae 2121.27-9 distinguishes what the fine for a particular offence is in Crick Gavloch, the Shankus Mar, and Cain Herhibe. It's an Irish word, and I'm not very good at pronouncing it. Crick Gavloch was clearly known to the author of the Brehon Nemet Toshok, and that Toshok means like the addendum, as he refers to it in refers to its discussions of the lay grade. So that was what was going on in Ireland up until the Anglo-Normans invaded. And at the same time, you had things like annalistic, the annals, reference to lawyers and law schools. You had the post, and then the Normans invaded, and we have the post-Norman law schools. Right. Now, I want to show you two maps. I'm going to show you the map of the law schools prior to the Norman invasion. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah.
Can you see it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and then I'm going to show you the map of the law schools after the Norman invasion. And this is where the families start to get powerful.
Okay.
I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah.
So, I just wanted to explain that to say that there's a clear distinction between the pre-Norman and post-Norman periods. And so at this stage, the profession started to become more hereditary, and you start to have famous Brehon families. And for example, most of them were operating between 1100 was the earliest clan, and that was the MacEgans, the Egans, and up until 1600, 1650, 1700s, which was the Clancy. They were probably the longest clan. No, they just went into the 1700s. And I have an alphabetical list of all of those families here. And maybe I can just go through that, and I'll just name the families.
Well, I
Yeah.
mean, we will. I think later on we'll sort of go through through some of
Mm-hmm.
them anyway, and some of them will naturally get thrown into the conversation, I
Okay. Yeah.
imagine, as we go. Um, but yes, if you're, so if you are anyone here has any relation to, just to reel off the sort of more popular ones, just like the McGeegans, McClancy's, the Daverners or Coffees, sort of hang around, and we'll hopefully get through some of that, and between mine and Kevin's sort of knowledge, we'll be able to sort of get through and maybe even answer some of your questions with regards to them. So yeah, like I said, but you made I'm got a wee side question, because you sort of you kind of hit one of the nails I have, one of the problems I have with when we look at history, and you've said it yourself about it being static, and we have this idea of we forget that history in general, and but especially Irish history, is continuous. It doesn't, nothing is the same sort of generation to generation, or and well, we as humans can see that anyway with our own lives, and we have this sort of it's like maps and these sort of quotations almost make history seem almost still, and it loses a lot of the actual history when you look at it like that, and Brehon Law is a great example of this, in that often it's attributed to being ancient, and when people think ancient, they think Bronze Age, they think Iron Age, and that it's been carried on for thousands of years. But you sort of just said there with the family sort of coming now, you're saying about 1100s, which is around the smack bang in the middle of the formations of surnames, and other hereditary job titles sort of coming into sort of formation with the help of like the church, bringing in sort of outside material, and that changing the people's perspective of the world, and a lot of trading backwards and forwards. Do you? I suppose the question I have from that sort of statement is, how ancient are the Brehon laws? That the and is it just that we feel that there's a different continuation from an earlier period, but we don't know, or
Mhm.
is it actually something that
Well,
you categorically say has been passed on?
I would say without a written record, we don't really know how old the Brehon laws are. But to use the description that the early Irish would have used for the Brehon laws, they were as old as the hills or as old as the rocks themselves. So that doesn't really answer your question, and we have to be a little bit strict to the historical narrative. And we know for a fact that these manuscripts were being written around 700 AD on. So in the golden age of Christian Ireland, once we had writing, what did we do? We started to write manuscripts, and there was no amount of detail that the Brehons and the scholars of the time were afraid to treat. So, if I don't know if that answers your question exactly, but
It does.
I
It does because I mean, there are a lot of people, a lot of online sites, a lot of you know, TikTok pages, stuff like that, that would be very, very categorical in their statement of this ancient. And I think that you're very much like me, in that unless we have the physical sort of evidence, no one's going to put a flag to a mast and say categorically, but at the same time there's an open sort of, I'm an open book to it, and if you present it to me, but at the same time, it's almost like I said, just not putting the flag to the flag post, to the mast, and
yeah.
just sort of saying that, um, but I think you sort of touched on our live that we had at the end of it, where you sort of said that I can be very just like to the facts. So if it's not factual, if it's not there, I'm not like entertaining it, and I think that
Yeah.
can be maybe the hard edge side of it. So your reply is sort of I
So
think a nicer way of going around it with my
I,
view of
I'd
it.
like
But
to ask you a question if I can.
yeah,
Do you believe in myth?
do I believe
And
in myth?
yes, what do you think of the likes of Laura Gavala Aaron, for example?
Okay,
Because if you go by that, and there's stories about the Brehon Law in that, and I know that it was written like much later. Okay, that's fine, but in that, in those mythologies, they talk about Brehon Law,
okay,
and that's why I'm saying that I I'm open to the fact to the idea that they knew what they were talking about. And I'm not saying that the mythology was real, not at all, but I'm trying to say that at least in how they thought of the law, and I'm talking about the early Irish Christian monks, I suppose, because they were the ones who were writing it. They were the ones who said this law is as old as the rocks and as old as the hills. And there's a story in the Laragavala Éireann. It tells the story of the migrations of people to Ireland. The first group were the Caesarians, the second group were the Partholonians. And it was with the Partholonians that um, the first judgment in Ireland was given. And that's like ancient. It is ancient if you believe in mythology, right? Because we're talking about prehistory here. So that's why I'm asking you.
okay. I mean, it's a really good point. First off, I'll clear up one thing and sort of say on. You said that then they start writing these down in the seventh century, and there's I do not for a second think that in the seventh century they just on the date that writing comes to formation in Ireland they suddenly just write all this down from nowhere. There is definitely a continuation of that. It's the same with when you speak about how long have the Gaels been in Ireland for, or the migration of the Gaels, and we're using Ogham stones as our example of the early Irish writing, archaic Irish. But obviously, they're bound to be speaking it before they start writing it. So it's been there longer than the Ogham stones have been there. So on that sort of point, I will say that I accept that it's older than the writings that we have. So therefore, it's older than written history, I suppose you could say. My view on the Irish mythology is that although very important to understanding uh, um, the Irish mindset, and how they viewed certain aspects of the world, I view it, and now this might be controversial to some people, I view it very much the same way as I view the Bible. I'm not religious, in that it has very important narratives, points, and instructions, and through stories, almost like The Boy Who Cried Wolf, in that you learn ideals and Irish sort of culture and nature and history and all that through these myths, so that they are very important, but they are stories using probable historical people that would have been prevalent, sort of like Cú Chulainn probably existed in my eyes. Was he
Hmm.
strapped to a rock for 3 days near death fighting off? No. And he's probably like the British Robin Hood, in a culmination of a lot of individuals, um, and their stories, and then embellished. So there's a grain of truth in the myth, in all the myths, but they are embellished for
Hmm.
purposes later on, to teach kids to look both ways before they
Okay.
cross the road. You know.
And so let's go back to the Lower Gavala Aaron. And at the time, if you were to say something, if you were a monk and you were to say something that contradicted the Bible, that would be considered heresy,
Mm.
right? So there's some theories that say, oh well, the Christian monks, they wrote the myth and they Christianized them, and I think that kind of like, it's not really taking in the full picture. Um, Perhaps they had to Christianize them or else they'd lose their head, right? So there's that side of it as well. But I think I do agree with you that there's a strain of truth. But how ancient is ancient for you?
Yeah, I would get that, because that's a very good point. But because to me, when I think of ancient, when someone says to me ancient, I'm thinking Bronze Age, I suppose. Um, I'm thinking is that's probably when I'm starting to, um, that and back is, to me, is ancient. Iron Age to me is not really ancient, and I think it's because, actually, for me, my first my first love in history was Roman history. So I use Roman history as the dates of Roman history as my marker, and obviously Roman
Mhm.
history has some very ancient history, and they were so advanced in our ancient history. Any Irishman from the first, second century going across and seeing Rome would have been shocked by it. It would have been so futuristic. Um, so but then, like, say, if you go to someone else, they could say, oh well, the fifth century is ancient to them. And when you see the stories of Irish medieval history, the way they speak about Niall Nogaluff and the fifth century, and Philemid and stuff like that, our ancient first sort of kings, high kings of Ireland, and they're all from the first to the fifth century. So, you know that's that's ancient to them. That's ancient history. Um, so yeah, I think that one goes down to perspective. My,
Yeah,
definitely.
yeah.
But yeah, I was gonna say, so I did have a look at, though, at when we were looking at, we sort of discussed about schools and stuff like that, um, and that, I saw one sort of statement, that the McClancy's, um, uh, may have actually done it, I believe, in their own castle that like it was rather than having a school set aside somewhere
Yeah.
like the Mohegan or the Daverans, they actually may have done it on their own grounds. Um,
Yeah,
they,
often the education took place in the home of the family, like the family's home, or at designated centres. So there's renowned legal schools such as the Cahir in County Tipperary or the Brehon Law School in County Clare, and these schools were informal but highly specialised.
mm,
They combined legal training with poetry and history, and that ensured the transmission of Gaelic intellectual traditions. So you're absolutely right. It so often, especially at the time when they had castles, right? Because thereafter, they've been providing legal services to the lords, and then they'll be getting compensated for that, so they could afford to have castles. But some smaller families, they would have done it just in their home. Yeah.
really, and that kind of what made me want to touch on something. So I did something a while ago about the League, the physician and medical sort of clans families, and there was in my research I came across how the church had sort of incorporated that medical the medicine sort of side of things, and had there's many in monastic sites they found many herb gardens that they believe Leagues physicians would have had like access to. Do you know of any sort of overlap between the church and the Brehon sort of teaching, whether they used monastic sites had anything, or have you heard or read anywhere that a monastic site's sort of famous for an overlap or a link to Brehon sort of?
Well, the one that pops into mind is Clonmel in County Tipperary, which means in Irish Clún Meala, which means the Valley of Honey. And honey had a lot of medicinal properties. You have to keep in mind that there was no pharmacies that you could just go in and buy some pills. So it would make sense that the monastic settlements, which were the centers of learning, the hub of learning, would also have herb gardens, and they would have herbologists, and they would have leagues who were expert in using these herbs. And if you were sick, you would go to a monastery to be healed, or you would go to the local healer, and they would have a knowledge of herbs. Now, Brehon families, along with bards, historians, and physicians, they all belonged to the same learned class of Aes Dana, and they shared similar privileges with each other, but they had distinct roles. In terms of wealth and land holding, Brehons were comparable to these other professions, often receiving land grants. So, yes, there was definitely an overlap between the monastic settlements and the services that were being provided, because a lot of the time a village or a town would pop up around one of these monastic settlements. And where the Druids before were acting in the capacity as judges, as time went on, the testimonies of the monks would take the place of the Druids. So there was at least three law languages, and depending on how many law languages you could speak, was the grade of Brehon you were. So the first law language was the Fenicius, the second law language was the Nemed, and the third law language was the Canon Law. So this is like you're basically learning to specialize in certain things. And if you didn't know how to speak the law language of the nobles, you wouldn't hear a case from the nobles. If you didn't know how to speak the law language of the canon law, you wouldn't be hearing any disputes in the canon law. So with that being said, you have to assume that there were Brehons who could speak all three languages and provided services to the monasteries and to the monks as well. But then you also had Brehons who could only speak one law language, and they were kind of dealing with the commoners, or what we would call the Feni, the free land tillers.
Brilliant. And yeah, so I suppose you're saying there that there's different sort of professions and the rank structure, and depending on how learned you are in the specific field, and you then take on you do your PhD, you do your masters, and then you sort of you become whatever letters get at the end of your name for being a Brehon, and then suddenly, so that would sort of, I guess, you would be paid more, which would then increase uh, power and influence, because that's another thing that I suppose actually, just while I'm going into this, I think I would like to sort of touch on this as well. But I want to know, did certain Brehon families like dominate particular regions or lordships in Ireland, and how did local politics affect our authority? But I want to attach this with a little bit of a point um, that I was sort of getting to there, with the McCarthys used the earners, the church, to come to prominence. They were land holding family within monastic sites, and they used the church, their family church, as a way to gain power and wealth to eventually challenge for the kingship, and eventually become kings of Munster. And I'm just wondering, with that, the region, on the aspect of regional influences of the these Brehon families, if there's any sort of similar things happening where these families become really powerful, kind of stand out above the other learned classes of their peers. Um,
Hmm.
does any, if any come to mind with that?
Yeah. Well, there's a handful of powerful Brehon families and like a scattering of less powerful Brehon families, and they all were kind of concentrated in certain areas. I think the most prolific were the Egan's and the McClancys. The Egan's were in Galway, Tipperary, Offaly, and Leitrim, and the McClancys were in Clare and Tipperary. So there's some overlap there with
Mm-hmm.
the different families. And as I'm going through this spreadsheet here, I can see that uh, O'Corneen was also in Leitrim, West Braefna. They were primarily poets and historians to O'Rourke's, but intersected with Brehon roles due to their learned status. They operated a school on Church Island, Lochgill. This is the Kerneen family. Their legal roles were secondary. So as I'm scrolling through the list here, I see that there was a few families based in Fermanagh, such as the Foy, the Hussey, the Keenan. The O'Breslin was in Donegal and Fermanagh. The O'Davarin, who you mentioned, they were in Clare and they had a famous Burren Law School. It was at Cahir MacNachtan, and they produced texts like the Book of Donald O'Davarin. They collaborated with McClancy and McEgan, and Gillen Nave O'Davarin founded the school around the year 1500s. The O'Dorans were in Leinster, in Wexford, and they were the Brehons to the MacMurrows. That was the King of Leinster, and they maintained a law school at Ballyorley, County Wexford, and also collaborated with the McEgans and other learned families. The O'Hagans were based in Tyrone, and they were Brehons to the O'Neills, which are a very powerful um, northern Ulster clan, and they were based at Tullahogue. They were the key legal advisors in Ulster, handling disputes over land, tribute, and succession. Now, there's a handful of other legal families there that maybe we'll talk about in a little while, but that's the
Yeah.
main clans. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so going back to, if we, with that fantastic list there of some of the names, and I know all of those names, but I do, some of the names that sort of jumped out at me is, like the Keenans were, there's even references to the Keenans being poets and Brehons. There's the O'Hagans, who were in charge of the inauguration of the O'Neills of Donegal, and also were, like you said there, they're also Brehons, so they're obviously, they're obviously families with dual roles. The Breslins, there's another one that sort of come to mind there. Now originally they're from Donegal and they end up in Fermanagh. They're Brehons, but they're also earners, so they're also incorporated in the church, and they actually are also mayors as well. And a mayor is an individual that can be a protector of a relic, a saintly relic. So we're seeing, like you said here, families having multiple roles, but still within this, as you said, as me, as someone who wouldn't really understand the history of Brehon Law and I know of physicians, I know of poets, I know of olives, I know these titles exist, but but you've said here that they're all on the same sort of area anyway. They're all on the same sort of belt of think of a pyramid of feudalism. The king on top and the craftsmen and the knights and stuff. And these learned professionals are all in the same area. So it looks like these families are sort of taking on any sort of role, maybe individuals within these families. It's like, Dad, I don't want to be a lawyer, I want to be a poet, and he's like, well, it's all right, it's still a learned craft. So it looks like we're seeing some of that happening in medieval Ireland. How would you reckon
Yeah,
I'm right with that?
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, the learned classes, these families that I just mentioned, they were specialized. They had some specialities that were focused on Brehon law, but there was also members of the family who were scholars, who were poets, who were, not really musicians. I haven't come across any members of these families who were like a harp player or a timpan player. So when I say learned classes, it's usually like the written word, scholars and annals and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I haven't fully researched this yet, and I need to watch a talk by Dr. Paul MacArthur that he did on the O'Rourke's. But I even saw that, so the O'Rourke's traditionally have no learned classes within there. They are a noble family, landowning, ruling family. They are a kingly class, so we should just put them in that sort of bracket for this discussion. But it does. I saw a reference, which I need to sort of, like say, investigate, but it seemed like that a branch of them had gone off and ended up becoming part of the learned class as well, which originally struck me as kind of like, okay, but I guess, and to some degree, all these learned families are cadet branches or septs of wider noble clans. These are, I imagine the Deverans are in some way possibly related to either the Efiac or Anya, who are in that northern area of Clare, or the Dalcash to the south. Then some can, or whether they grafted that genealogy to that one of those families, or are legitimately part of one of those families. I suppose it's not as weird as I initially thought. But it was something that I was still a little bit taken back by, that maybe the nobility are sort of taking an interest in the crafts, shall we say, and taking them on themselves. And I wonder if you know of any other sort of, if you can think of just off the top of your head. I know it's maybe throwing a bit of a curveball to think of. There's probably 3,500 sort of Irish surnames, and I'm going, pick one.
Um, I mean, nothing is coming to mind straight away, but I do know what you're talking about, and I think it's a very valid point, and it's a good observation.
um, well, thank you. I'm just trying to pull back my. I have a question here that I wanted to ask, and I've just got it up here. Uh, so this is the question. I think actually that kind of. This is the point I wanted to um really have you on here for, and this was the next question, was sort of something that we kind of spoke about before in our own communications, and it's something that you sent me across a PDF a while ago, and it sort of mentioned these families, and then like focused on local issues, focused on higher issues, and you kind of touched on it already in the your general conversation, but just so we can just nail down on this specific thing again, for any of those that are just sort of coming in a wee bit later, is that which hereditary families were most closely associated with the practice of Brehon law, and how did this? But the main point is, how did this role differ from each other? So how did different Brehons differ from each other, and their sort of understanding of each other, and what would their day in day out bread and butter be for these ranks, these ranks within the specific Brehon?
Okay, yeah, it's a good question. So we're talking about Brehons, but there was also law agents who were kind of what we would consider solicitors, barristers today. They kind of argued the case, the facts on behalf of the families, and I think they were called Aigna, something like that. I'd have to look at my notes, but I'm pretty sure they're called Aigna. And so it really depends on what period in history you're talking about, which family you're talking about, and there was not really a standard day to day, but you could imagine that if somebody becomes like an Olive Brehon, which is the highest ranking Brehon you could be, uh, possibly you're advising a king or a chieftain or something like that. You're gonna have a bunch of students beneath you who you're imparting your wisdom to, and for example, you could be writing manuscript. You could be writing, like I have the MacEgan legal manuscript over there on my shelf. So that could be part of your day to day. It could be just imparting the oral tradition. And here's the thing as well. When you think of a lawyer today, you're going to probably get a picture of their office. And what do you see on the shelves? You see a ton of books. So the Brehons had to memorize all of that information. And the manuscripts that we have today, they're kind of just like an aid de memoir. They're not like, here's how you become a Brehon. They're like, if you are a Brehon, these are the points that would jog your memory. So it really depended on like the rank of the Brehon, and the were they a Brehon or were they a law agent, you know? So
Okay,
there was a
so
class of jurists. Yeah.
so if as almost not quite layman, but I'm gonna take it from a layman. So anyone sort of has been following through the start, I'm gonna give you my sort of now understanding of the wider picture, before we come to the almost the end of Brehon law. But so at this stage, what we're looking at is a older than written law system that exists in Ireland, and then once the written language comes into Ireland, the priests write them down, and there's a bit of a blurry area whether it's whether the law is Christianized, or whether maybe it's the Irish Christians writing it from, where they've got their own culture, their heritage, they're Irish, they're Christian, but they're maybe more Irish than Christian when they're writing these down. So there's a bit of a grey area how these laws and how the Christianization of these the overlap have happened within the law system that we have surviving today. But the families that are as it starts to come into formation, the families start to come into formation in the 11th and 12th century, much like other surnames, and these families start to monopolize in the law within their own wee areas, and if you are a king and you have a succession issue, you have families who have really sort of reached the peak of Brehon Academy. They've completed Kevin's full course, and they are now the full Brehons. But if you are a small local king, or maybe just a small local noble with a small minor land or cattle dispute, you can take that to a maybe more local level, which you believe was an EIG, was it? Sorry, was the
Aigna.
Aigna, sorry.
Aigne.
And uh, from then on, obviously, and if you are one of these Brehon families, you will have possibly a school set up depending on your wealth, and or you maybe learn your trade within the family sort of headquarters, whether that be a castle, tower house, a specific area. So, and like you said, there's not a specific day to day. The laws sort of change, I suppose, as any laws do, with as society changes, to encompass new ways of thinking. But there are, at the heart of all the laws, I'm guessing, is the book that you sort of referenced with our main manuscripts, which is the main, that's the core of the where these minor laws will end up coming out of, sprouting out of, to encompass, like I said, modern sort of thinkings for the time period. And would you say that's kind of a right way as a layman to sort of start to understand the
I couldn't
process?
have said it better myself. I would just add that D.A. Binchy, who was a very prominent scholar about the Brehon Law, he made an attempt to consolidate all of the manuscripts, and that's in the Corpus Juris Hibernicae. I think I made a reference to that when I read out of this book here. And there's 5 volumes of the Corpus Juris Hibernicae, and that just gives you an insight into how much written material there actually is. Now, I haven't got a chance to read it because it costs a lot of money, and I don't know, I honestly don't know if the manuscripts are translated or not. I get the impression that they're not translated, and when I say that, like, some of the manuscripts would appear in Latin as well as Irish. Um, and this would be a document or a series of books that would have things like the Bec Breha in it, which is the B judgments, the Brehon Named, the Brehon Named Toshak, Shanachus More, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, so I just, anyone that's I had the same idea whenever I know someone whose job it is to translate medieval manuscripts, and they were telling me how many have yet to be translated, and I was thinking, well, you speak Old Irish, you speak Irish, you speak all these languages. Surely it's just a case of looking at it and writing it down the same way Google Translate kind of does it, and the
Hmm.
explanation that they end up spending the next hour explaining it to me over a pint was just how detailed and how problematic the a simple translation, and how the way that it's written and it can be anything from the way the individual has written it. It's almost like doctor's handwriting, and it's, and then you can have very clear, but you've also got to take into a lot of context on what they're trying to imply, because
Yeah,
straight English translation of Irish doesn't look right. So you've got to try and make sure that you are
yeah,
understanding the
hmm,
individual who is writing it and what message they're trying to
yeah.
convey.
Yeah,
um
so the two famous translators of these Irish texts are, well, they're old, like they're John O'Donoghue,
Donovan.
Donoghue or Donovan, John
Yeah,
O'Donovan,
Donovan, yeah.
and Eugene O'Curry.
Mm,
And when you read their notes, they lament at how difficult it was because there's some words that don't exist in modern Irish,
mm,
and they were just trying to make their best guess what this word could have meant. And so that's perhaps why these many manuscripts remain untranslated. Now, we're in the modern age and we're in the age of AI. So I had the idea of like training AI how to read Old Irish and then just feeding these manuscripts through and getting the translations and then reviewing the translations and seeing like what looks interesting,
mm.
what's a piece of the puzzle here that we didn't have before. And it's not just the Brehon laws that remain untranslated. It's like a lot of mythology as well.
Mm.
And I just lament the fact that there's no will among Irish people today, and especially not the government, because if there was a will, it would be done to know what's in those untranslated manuscripts.
Yeah,
Because that to me is like a treasure waiting to be tapped.
I agree. I mean, I do feel, obviously, I have a lot of friends who work in that field, and I know that there's a great desire and fire for them to, but they have the same problem, I suppose, all academics, you know, if you're part of the arts, the academics, any of these sort of things that sort of go outside of whatever government forces deem necessary at the time. Um, the funding is just non-existent, and you almost have these sort of these professionals sort of going like they're almost praying for the lottery, you know, or some wealthy person, some individual interested in the O'Neills to go, I've got this manuscript that needs translating, and they're like, well, give us £1 million and we can do them all. But
Yeah, exactly.
I also know there's a great number of our manuscripts missing. You know, I always there's the St. Lawrence family who own, I believe it's called St. Lawrence Bay, actually, in just the north of Dublin. It's a wee sort of bit just we're not far from where Battle of Clontarf was fought, or where they suspect it was fought. Anyway, they own a house and it's got this massive library. And I remember watching a video of this guy going around, and this family has been here since the Norman invasion. They are well established, and this house has been their headquarters since then. And I always thought, I wonder how many manuscripts are just as you've been used as bookmarkers in that bloody place, you know. And we know obviously of the black market, we know of all these other things, but yeah, like I say, I agree with you in the sense that I don't feel our government really cares, and the evidence for that would be the fact that well, I know my government, because I obviously have a different government. I'm from Northern Ireland. My government definitely doesn't care about Irish history, but but your government.
Well, they were responsible for a lot of it.
Yeah, but your government. I mean, we don't. If anyone that maybe goes, nah, it's not as bad as thing, but I would tell you to go look up what happened to they found a Viking settlement,
Hmm.
and they built a car park over it, and I would
Yeah.
just tell you
Hmm.
but they weren't interested in the history of it,
No,
and
but I think there's more to it than that because I spoke to Bertie Brosnan about this, and he and I are of the opinion that there's a concerted effort to suppress our history. There's a concerted effort to suppress our identity. And, you know, if there wasn't, then as soon as we got independence, we should have directed all the resources at the state and translated all of those manuscripts. The fact that we haven't, and the fact that most of not most of them, but a lot of the manuscripts are in libraries in England and on the continent as well, but that's got more to do with the missionaries, St. Gall. I went to see that exhibition that's in the museum at the moment, Words on the Wave,
mm,
St. Gall and Ireland in early medieval Europe or something like that. And it's fascinating. I would recommend people go in and check that out. But if you go to that exhibition, there's a lot of manuscripts that are written, Christian manuscripts, but there's a lot of manuscripts anyway that are written and stored in libraries in continental Europe as well. So if you want to study some Gaelic manuscripts or Latin manuscripts with the insular style, you need to go over to St. Gall in Switzerland to study those manuscripts. And that's a bit of a shame. I often thought about like having a campaign to return the scripts, return the manuscripts back to our home. And you know, with all the with all the kind of woke politics that's going on now, you think you'd get a bit of a support behind that, you know? Um,
well, I mean, uh, I would certainly support the and I suppose I suppose in some way I'm seen in some circles I'm seen as a bit of a lefty liberal, but you know, but I would support anything that sort of encourages. I think my attitudes to Irish history is that we are, especially someone who's from the north. I suppose it's maybe a wee bit slightly different to someone from the south. Is that we have had our history suppressed due to colonialism and many other factors, and we still have the scars of our colonial past, and the shame of our history.
mhm.
The problem
It's just,
I have
yeah.
though is with it is that in the modern era is how do you fit that in when people will try to weaponize. I see it all the time where people try to link themselves to the Britannia or the Cruithne of Ulster to justify the plantations of Ulster, and you sort of and the invasion of the Gael and these sort of
Yeah.
arguments that, and it's just like, how do you do it in a way that doesn't give these lunatics ammunition to justify links to antiquity um, to the
Yeah.
modern era, and it's sort of
Well,
something I'm trying to juggle with. But I would still,
yeah.
but as a historian, I still want those manuscripts here. I'd still want
Huh?
access to them as someone who has a
Yeah.
love of Irish history. So it's
Well, let me say this. The simple answer is I don't know how you how you can do that. But here's the thing that I realized: the more you learn, and it's not unique to Northern Ireland. Like we in the South also have the scars of conquest. Um, and I think I don't know because I'm only speaking for myself here, but I think that that's um, part of the reason why we stopped fighting. Well, most of us stopped fighting because it was just like we have had enough of the um, the years of colony, you know. Um, but here's the thing: the more you learn, the harder it is to sleep at night. The more I know about Irish history, the sadder it makes me feel. And I was already kind of sad, you know, once I heard about the situation on the most basic level, entry level knowledge about the north of Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. Um, that broke my heart. But then the more I look, the more I learn, it breaks my heart even more, you know. Um, so yeah, and that's probably why we have such beautiful sad music and such beautiful sad poetry. We have happy music and happy poetry as well, but we're also known for being kind of melancholy and crying into our pints of Guinness
yeah, I agree.
or Murphy's or Beamish,
Yeah, no,
whatever takes your
We'll go for
fancy.
Guinness, and
Well,
I
we have a saying down here that a Guinness was once called Arthur's Protestant Porter.
yes.
So I just buy it out of habit, but when I see a Beamish or a Murphy's, I'll go for that.
Yeah, it's the same with when you read about Jameson's whiskey's history, and whenever
Yeah,
although they're a Scottish plantation family,
yeah.
and their last sort of individual who was born in Scotland, but the family had already established themselves in Ireland as well, doing their whiskey, and his exploits in Africa, and
Oh yeah, yeah.
it kind of made Jameson's taste a wee bit, I kind of went for Bushmills then, but I'll still drink if it's put in front of me, But yeah, Guinness, obviously. Well, my family's originally, I believe the McGuinnesses probably would have been my ancestors, overlords.
Oh really?
Yeah, that my family
Cool.
traditionally is from within their heartlands, so I would probably have some connection, probably just paying rents to them for.
Right.
Basically, I'm just carrying on a family tradition of paying them rents, but now to pay the
Yeah, yeah,
tax.
yeah. And so tell me this because I don't think we brought this up on the previous podcast when you were the guest. You told me your name is Michal Doyle.
Yes.
What are your other family names?
Well, the funny thing is, Doyle. So I'm related to Doyle's, Burns,
Oh, I'm a
spelt.
Byrne.
Yeah, right. But the thing is, those names are traditionally associated with Wicklow. Um,
Yeah.
but actually, those names are also. So my family are from South Down and
Mm-hmm.
Armagh, South Down and sort of East Armagh, um, and uh, traditionally around. But our heartland is just outside Banbridge, and which is
On this
heart of
town in the county
IBA
down
McGuinness
one
territory.
morning last July.
Yeah. So, but my family's been there for centuries, as far as we can tell.
Mm.
And the Doyles and the Burns, which begs the question, where did these Doyles and Burns come from? I do have Morgans as well, which are originally from a branch from
Scotland.
just across the border in Monaghan. And
Okay.
then they're attested in the annals as well. So I know of that link.
Hmm.
So yeah, Morgans, Burns, and Doyles are my sort of hereditary
Interesting.
background. Um, but like I say, the Doyle and Byrne thing, it's really interesting because I found a pattern. Wherever there's Doyles, there's Burns. Um, but there's
Hmm.
no, but none of these branches are related outside of outside of genetics. I don't know if they're related genetically, but outside of in the annals or any of the other sort of genealogical works, they're never attributed as being related to each other. But in
Hmm.
every area there's a Doyle, you will find a native branch of Burns, which is I thought
Interesting.
was very, very
Yeah.
interesting. Uh,
So my clan's names are Flanagan, Byrne,
yeah.
Cleary,
Oh,
and Lynch. Yeah, Cleary, I know. And Lynch. And I don't know for sure, but we reckon that the Flanagans are from Fermanagh area, like what would have been the Kingdom of Brehon. Um, and if that's the case, then there would have been scholars to the O'Connors and the O'Rourke's and the O'Reillys. But I haven't done a DNA test, so I'm not sure for certain.
well, I mean, if
Uh,
you look at the culmination of your sort of surnames, it definitely highlights a specific area along the Shannon from Breffna to South Galway,
mm,
because there are Lynches who are part of the
yeah,
a
in
Fiachra
Connacht.
Anya or Evina groups. The Clearys
Yeah,
are obviously Fiachra Anya. They were leaders of it before the O'Shaughnessy's. Um, then you have Burns is you're probably it, that your spelling's Byrne,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
But that can also be the Beirne group of
yeah.
North
Oh,
Roscommon.
but
Do you
I
anglicize the
think
name to that?
I don't know, but I think that clan, it might be a different clan, but I was speaking to somebody and said, "Oh, you're a Byrne. I'm a Byrne as well." And he said, "I'm not that type of Byrne.
Yeah,
I'm a I'm a descended from a certain foreign group of Byrnes." And I can't remember for the life of me what he said, but I think there's two distinct groups of Burns. So my Burns descend from Bran, which is the Raven, and he was called the Raven because of his bloodlust.
yeah. So yeah, but the burn that burn is from Wicklow,
That's right, yeah.
right? But the burn both spellings of the burns are totally different. And then there's
Hmm.
BURN, which is attributed to Scotland, but actually all of them are interchangeable. So we didn't have so many people spelt it different ways until we had the standardization of surnames in the 19th century. So you can be a BYRNE or a BURN and still be a descendant of the BEIRNE group of Roscommon.
Okay.
Even if the spelling does not denote origin. And that's what
Oh,
I
I got
yeah.
you, yeah.
So
Hmm.
that's what I try to incorporate into people in this channel all the time. Is spelling does not denote origin, because the way we spelt things were interchangeable up until the 19th century. So you have 400 years of interchanging different variations and different spellings, and then you've got suddenly this big stamp of standardization in the 19th century, and they just standardized to the closest one that you were already spelling it. So you have all these groups that are the same name, but they're just spelled completely different.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, but that may be one to look into to see because your family may still have come from Wicklow. Obviously, the Galway and Limerick and all those areas where during the Industrial Revolution you've got families migrating all over Ireland. So
Yeah,
I'm not going to
absolutely.
discontinue
And
discredit that
the
either.
famine as well
Yeah,
scattered
famine.
people
Yeah, that's another one.
all
But
up to Dublin and overseas. So,
But we'll
uh,
actually that'll actually bring us into sort of the actual I suppose the actual last question for when we talk about our terrible history and these horrible things that have happened. And obviously one of these horrible things, apart from a loss of language, a loss of identity, a loss of our history, historical artifacts, is the loss of our Brehon law system And what became of the Brehon Law after the decline of the Gaelic order and the enforcement of English common law in Ireland? Is the question.
Yeah, and it's a big question. And I would say that these laws, Brehon laws, were never given up willingly. And there was one man in particular called Sir John Davies, and he was the Attorney General for Ireland between the years 1608 to 1616, or I could be getting the first year wrong. 1605 to 1619, I think. Anyway, that's not really important. It was the beginning of the 1600s. And he said, there is no nation of people under the sun who loves equal and indifferent justice better than the Irish. Nor will they rest better satisfied with the execution of that law, even if it's against themselves, so that they too can have the benefit and the protection of the law when upon just cause they do desire it. And so that man, John Davies, he was not a friend of the Brehon Law, even though he spoke so highly of the Irish love of justice. And this is the thing that I mourn, is that it's like finding out tomorrow that we had a Gaelic sports or a Gaelic language that we've forgotten about. That's how significant Gaelic law was to our identity. And then fast forward to 1958, a barrister was writing in an article called The Bench and Bar in Ireland. And he spends most of the article kind of lamenting the Irish irreverence for law by explaining some stories of how the Irish behaved in the English common law courts, quite disrespectfully. And there was one story in particular where he talks about, I think it was Justice Starling or Justice Denning, I'm not too sure exactly. And he said to the witness, tell me, sir, what happens to people in your country when they tell lies? And the Irishman replied in a charm that would disarm anybody. He said, begor, my lord, I think that side usually wins. Right? And then he goes on to say that this Irish irreverence for law, this Irish irreverence for law doesn't stem from sympathy with crime or wrongdoing in general, but rather from the fact that the Irish, who have a fairly long memory, know that the law in Ireland is not Irish law. However just it may be, it was once most unjust. It does not command reverence as a native institution, but merely respect nowadays as a part of the essential part of the machinery of government. So, how did we get from a nation of people that loved justice more than any other nation on earth to being irreverent and disrespectful to the law? Well, R.W. Bentham touched on it there when he says, it was once most unjust. Because in the period from Sir John Davies up until the modern era, we had the penal laws, which demonized Catholics. We had multiple famines, not just on Gorta Moor, the Great Famine, which I know people are going to say it's not a famine, it's a genocide. Okay, it was a genocide.
I'm going to say that I disagree, and that might be, but I that doesn't mean that I think the British were right in it or in any way, and they were
No. I'm just doing it to appease people who I actually disagree as well, because I know the legal definition of a genocide,
yeah,
and there has to be intent there. But that's besides the point,
yeah.
right? A lot of people, when I say mention a famine, they say it's not a famine, it's a genocide. So
Someone already
just to
did
appease,
before you said that.
well, on TikTok, or
Yeah,
where?
TikTok. Yeah, TikTok's.
Oh, God, that's what I mean. So I'm just appeasing those sorts of people, right? Who feel the need to tell me, like amateur historian. Okay. So anyway, come back to the point. The penal laws happened. They completely they tormented the Irish. They bet the language out of them. That's how harsh English rule was and British rule was in our country. That we can't even think in our own tongue to curse the bastards. We can't even imagine an insult in our own tongue. So I believe that this was the great loss to Ireland and Irish identity. Um, and so a crime was defined as a lapse in the standard of personal honor and brotherly kindness. And now a crime is defined as a wrong against society as a whole. So it's collectivized punishment, and we have institutionalized retribution and punishment. Whereas the Brehons were all about finding balance and harmony. So before we go, maybe I'm just looking at my battery because it's like it's not my laptop is not charging and I've 7% left. Before we go, I'd like to give you an example of how the Brehon Law worked in practice. It was all focused on restitution. They had to rely on a principle of common custom, so that was known and expected by the people. They had to deliver the judgment in the form of poetry, and they had to use an example, an observable example from nature. So this was really natural law. So a young boy, we'll call him Cormac, he was the son of Art McCon, and he was the grandson of Concade Cahach, which was kind of the 100 Battles. But his father's throne, Art, was usurped. Art was killed by the usurper and was now sitting on the throne. And because of that, Cormac was raised in secret, but some people say he was raised by a she-wolf. Now, one day on the hill of Tara, a woman's sheep escaped. And they got into the very wealthy crop, the crops of the queen that were very expensive. These were woad crops, which is the blue that was used in Braveheart for the face paint, but also used for dyeing clothes. And because the queen had suffered a loss, which in the Brehon Law was called animal trespass, she called on her husband, which was completely acceptable, to hear the case and to judge the case. And the reason I said it was completely acceptable is because kings were considered to have, or expected to have, the Fear Flahamon, which is the nobleman's truth, or the king's judgment, let's say, the judgment of a Brehon. And so he heard the case and he said, well, this is a clear loss. Your sheep escaped, they got into my wife's crops, they destroyed the crops, so you should give the sheep as payment for the crops. Now, upon hearing this, a young boy in the crowd shouted up, plucked up his chest and said, that is a false judgment. That is not the correct judgment. As the fleece grows on the sheep, so does the fleece grow on the land. That's the principle of nature that he was observing. So she should give the fleece of the sheep as payment for the crops that were destroyed. And the legend goes, that because he had this true judgment, he was recognized as the rightful king of Tara, the son of Art McCon, and that man was named Cormac MacArt. So that was just a little insight into how did the Brehon laws actually work in practice. And these mythologies, these stories that I'm telling you, and that's the only story I've told you, but I have other stories on my channel. They were used as precedent in the same way that case law is used today for precedent. These mythological stories and accounts were used as precedent to guide the thinking of the Brehons.
Brilliant. That amazing story there, and I know your battery's sort of running out here, so we'll try and wrap it up here for you so you don't completely die in the middle of a sentence, and so
I still have 7%, so we're
yeah.
good for a while.
But I think what we'll do is I love it here. Whenever I'm just gonna I ask the history of the O'Sullivans of Cork, no answer. I can happily tell you about the history of the Sullivans of Cork. I have a video on them, but I just have to go back to that one because someone. Thank you for. But anyway, the what we will do is we'll go out to any questions that anyone might have with regards to Kevin's work and the Brehon Law. We can, if any of you sort of mention a family that sort of, we'll try and get some questions. But what I will just use this time to say is that if you are not following the Brehon Academy on YouTube, and hopefully if we can get him on TikTok, because I just want to say, Kevin, that like, just say, just to sell TikTok to you a wee bit.
Yeah, yeah.
We had so far we had like 2,000 people through watching this.
Wow. Okay.
So maybe
And we have 4 on YouTube right now.
yeah. So maybe just bear it in mind and get yourself across the TikTok. So he actually does have a TikTok page. So maybe if you go like that as well. Anyway, it won't do you
Yeah.
any harm to like it.
Yeah. And I will upload videos soon. I will.
And we'll we'll try and get him onto TikTok because he has some absolutely amazing stuff with regards especially to as you've seen a glimpse into just a fraction of it when it comes to Brehon Law and the history of it, that he is a fountain of knowledge. He's obviously taken a bite out of the salmon, so we can, so if we can just get across there and give him all the likes. He's so close to 30,000 people on his YouTube channel. So it's Brehon Academy. I will type it in here too. If you don't know, okay, let me, and go across there. Yeah, what's his channel? Yeah, I've put it in the comment section, Bowden. Ryan as well. Sorry,
I'm 500 subs away from 30k. So if you want to be in the pre 30k club, get over there and subscribe to my YouTube channel.
Exactly. Hello, Common Sense. How are we doing? So okay, let's see. Let's see. Would the Anglo-Normans have used Brehon Law? I'm talking about.
So the king at the time issued the statutes in 1366, called the Statutes of Kilkenny, and they were directed specifically at the Anglo-Norman lords that were living in Ireland and had become, as I said, more Irish than the Irish themselves. And there was a number of prohibitions, let's say. And among them were fostering to Irish families or from Irish families, having Irish women nurse their children, having surnames that were Gaelicized, but most importantly, and the one that stuck out the most for me, is going to the Brehons for adjudication of disputes. So you can imagine that these Anglo-Norman lords were in Ireland and they were like, wow, this Brehon law is actually pretty cool and I like that. And they decided to opt for the Brehon law. Now, when I talk about these Anglo-Norman lords, they were less English than the English themselves, because they didn't spend a lot of time in England. They came from France, from Normandy. That's where you get the Norman part. And the Anglo part is like they just kind of stopped over in England for, I don't know, a couple of centuries or whatever. And then they spent a lot of time, like 200 years they'd been in Ireland at this stage, or about 150 years or something like that. So, yes, is the short answer.
773 Chicago, that was from Earth Angel. 773 Chicago, was there any Brehon laws that were different amongst each tour?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. So yes, the short answer is yes. We had Cain Law and we had Ordidus, and if my memory serves me correctly, the Cain Law was the universal law and the Ordidus was the local custom, and that's how you would experiment with different approaches to having a remedy. See, I should say this, that it didn't come from the king or from the Brehons. The Brehons didn't make the law. The Brehons just judged the law. They determined the law. So how did the law begin? It began through local custom. and there was no enforcement mechanism. There was no prisons in early Ireland. So you have to ask yourself, why were the people following this law? What was the moral weight that the law had? And there's a couple of reasons for that, and I mentioned a couple of them already. First of all, the Brehons were considered to be descended from the Druids, and the Druids were the priests of the tribe. So they believed there's a lot of evidence to suggest that the poetic utterances of the Brehon was revered as if they were in the presence of justice manifested. So there was a lot of respect for that. And if you didn't follow the judgment, eventually you could be outcast, like outlawed. But your family would disown you first. If you didn't honor the law. So there was a lot of it built into the social fabric. And that comes back to the quote that I was mentioning a few minutes ago from R.W. Bentham. This Irish irreverence for law does not stem from sympathy with crime, but rather from the fact that the Irish know that the law in Ireland is not Irish law. It doesn't command reverence. That's the important word. Reverence as a native institution. But really respect nowadays as an essential part of the machinery of government. So there was a lot of respect for the Brehons, for the judges, for the words that they spoke. But there was one example. This is actually where probably the Brehon law falls down a bit, because there was one example that I came across called the Battle of Culdrevne, or the Battle of the Book. And that was about a dispute between two monks, St. Columkill and St. Finbar or Finian. Um, and essentially the judge, who was also a king, he gave a judgment saying, to every cow its calf, to every book its little book. And that probably in the Irish would have been Leabharine, like to every leabhar, which is the Irish for book, it's Leabharine, its little book. But that didn't avert the two monks from going to war with each other. And a lot of people died, and eventually Columkill was exiled to Iona Island, and that's a good thing that that happened, because that's where he founded his monastery. And yeah, that's about it.
Another question here from Jessamine Stevens. Are there any good reads on Brehon Law? Now I'm going to expand. I would probably say, have you got any suggestions for those who are literally just getting into layman's history, and then
Yeah, let me go and grab the book off the shelf, or a
he's
couple
always
of
going into
books.
the woods.
um, right.
Well done, Peter Corliss. That's correct.
This is the first book that I got on the Brehon Law. It's called The Brehon Laws, a Legal Handbook. It still has all of my notes from about 15 years ago. I have all these like markers in it. That's the one I'd recommend you start with.
What one's that
It
one?
has
Hold it a bit
everything
higher,
in it.
sorry.
Sorry, can you see it
No,
now?
it's your. Oh, there you go. The
There you
Brehon
go.
Laws, a legal handbook. Okay.
By Lawrence Skinnell. And there's two versions of it. There's two editions of it. You can find this on archive.org. There's a one version, which is this version, and it's 1894, I think. Let me just double check. Oh yeah, it's 1894, because I had to translate the Roman numerals. And then there's a newer version that's 1919, I think. Let me just double check.
Hello, Dwayne. Welcome in. Are you just checking that there now? Yeah, that's all right.
1917 is the
1917.
second edition. Yeah. So you can get both of those on archive.org. If you want something a little bit more detailed, if you're interested in the B judgments, you could go for this. I got this off Institute of Dublin Institute of Advanced Studies. This is probably a little bit more complicated than like a beginner would enjoy. There's also older books which I wouldn't trust the translations as much as I do these modern books. There's the Ancient Institutes and Ancient Institutes. If you type in Ancient Institutes Brehon Law, you'll PDF will pop up. I think there's 5 volumes of that. And then you have this one as well, Early Irish Contract Law. by Neil MacLeod, and yeah, it's very good. Um, I mean, it says in the Shankis More that the world would be evilly situated if contracts were not binding. So, contract makes the law. Contract was at the center of all of the agreements, and they used to make contracts in a way that it would cost them more not to fulfill their promises than to yeah, abandon their promises.
Brilliant.
So that's it. Yeah.
A lot of you are asking for surnames, and most of them aren't Brehons, which I will cover on. I'll probably after our live is finished. I think how much battery have you got there, now, Kevin?
I have 6%.
6%. Well, if what are we sort of coming to here? I think we've been at this for an hour and a half,
Hour and a half. Yeah.
which I think is because like I say, most say hi, Kayla Cross, how you doing? Um, I'm role playing a game set in Dalriada. A Brehon is the critical character in the game. There you go. Well, if you want to learn more about to flesh out that Brehon character, I would check out Brehon Academy's channel.
Mhm.
He has a lot of information on there that would help you. And I've seen that he is very active in his comment section as well. So I'm sure if you ask a
Yeah.
question, he on his and it helps his algorithm as well. So get those likes and comments in.
And if I could just say to that person who is playing the role-playing game with the central character as a Breton, I would recommend checking out Heroes of Tara. That was written by Jacob Durkin, and it's like a rule book for Dungeons and Dragons, but it's set in ancient Ireland, and it's very detailed. The amount of information he goes into it, so that would help you flesh out your role-playing game as well.
Brilliant. Right, so we'll start to wrap it up there. Those of you, I'll just do my last little plug for myself, in that those of you who want in your normal history, the normal lives that I do, I will be back in about sort of 15 minutes to half an hour for the usual live. But in the meantime, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Kevin for coming on again. Thank you for having me on his channel first. So if you want to see almost the first part of this and how this talk came about, go check out his channel for that video. But if you have a great interest, look at the comment section if you need to know how it's spelt. It's Brehon Academy, and I suppose the last thing I want to do is there anything you want to say to plug any upcoming projects, anything you want to sort of fire out to the community.
And yeah, my camera battery is just about to die, so this is perfect timing. Um, I would just like to invite people to check out my website, brehonacademy.org. That's where we're going to find all of my information, all of the information on my online courses. We also have a merchandise store over there, a blog, and a members library, which you mentioned earlier. Thank you. And if that doesn't take your fancy, check me out on YouTube. I try to release a video every Thursday. This Thursday, I have a video with Dave O'Reilly, and it's oh, I've stopped.
It's okay.
It's about the Irish chariot. So he's going to be explaining the Irish chariot, which he has rebuilt. And yes, what else? Oh, you can check us out on social media as well. So we're on Facebook, we're on X, we're going to be on TikTok, promise. We're on Instagram, and of course we're on YouTube. And please help me get to 30,000 subscribers, because I'm so close.
Get right, you heard that. Get onto YouTube, get him up to his get the last few subscribers in first to get him to 30,000. So we'll end this live, and then I will. So thank you for the 2,182 of you who joined in. Thank you for the 18,000 likes. And on TikTok, thank you for all my regulars on YouTube. These are great. And I will be back in about probably 30 minutes for my own live. But until then, thank you very much. Have a great night. Thank you again, Kevin.
Thank you.
We'll stay on here just for a minute here and just make sure that everything's happy. 29k. Who's 29k? I don't know what that is, but
29 and a half.
Oh, 29 and a half. He's 29 and a half.
Yeah, so I just need 500 more, and that's after jumping up a lot in the last couple of weeks. So yeah, I think
I got 29k likes. Oh, it's only showing 18 on mine. Maybe it hasn't
Oh,
updated
okay, okay.
yet. But
All right. Well,
so
thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed this conversation, and best of luck with everything you're doing.
no, thank you very much, Kevin. We'll definitely speak soon. So, but to all the chat, thank you very much. I'll see you in about half an hour. Take care of yourselves and see you soon. So, Slank full. That's you go on YouTube. As always, I'll probably see you in about 30 minutes. Kat and all the regulars. Ronnie, I'll see you all shortly. And let me just close down this one. Thanks very much, guys.